WFJA 105.5, Sanford, Pinehurst, Southern Pines.
It's now time for the Recovery Boys, Lewis Finch and Macon Moy, as they spend the next hour with you discussing the issues of alcoholism and drug addiction, as well as the road to recovery. Here's Lewis and Macon.
You know, during the holiday season, particularly Christmas, there's this little drink that's a Christmassy drink called eggnog that I used to drink in the day.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine the person that invented eggnog? He had to say to himself, gee, I want a little buzz, but I also like pancakes. I mean, is that the wackiest drink?
Listen, alcoholics, we don't need a lot of reason to come up with different
We'll
reasons
mix anything, won't we?
Yeah, we will. And you know what? Something about eggnog that gave you permission to drink early.
That's true.
You know, towards the end of my drinking career, I didn't need permission. I just did it. So anyway, we're going to open up the show tonight. First off, a little housekeeping. If you want to give us a call during the show, our phone number here is 866-465-3110. You can go to our website, therecoveryboys.com, and there's a listen live button if you're outside our listening area and you want to. And later on, all of our episodes, and you know what, Lewis, I was going to tell you, this is season 2 for us.
That's right, the new year.
2020, so season 2. This is episode 2 of season 2, which is cool. We have a wonderful guest who I'll introduce in just a few minutes. In studio tonight, which is always fun for us. But we're going to open up the show tonight just like we did last week. One of the things that we like to do for our listeners is we try and touch all different levels of recovery. This is a recovery show. I'm in recovery. Lewis is in recovery. We talk about drug addiction, alcoholism, all the reasons that we ended up using drugs and alcohol, co-occurring disorders. So we try and cover the gambit. But one of the things we wanted to do for our listeners was to introduce them to somebody new to recovery, so we could actually instead of us describing how we did it, we would talk to somebody who's in early recovery. And Kayla came on last week, and she's back with us to start the show today. And so we want to say hey to Kayla.
Hello.
How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Good. You have a good week?
I did.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we went to the convention in Asheville this weekend. So.
Good for you. Good for you. You know, one of the things I wanted you to tell our listeners is somebody new to recovery and how important it is that you change your schedule. I mean, we used to get in trouble with our time. Time was the one thing that we didn't seem to manage very well. And when you're new to recovery, schedules are so important. Tell me, Kayla, I mean, how do you go about your schedule? I mean, what do you do to try and help yourself in early recovery?
Well, I've joined a home group, and I try to hit at least a meeting a day. It's recommended the first 90 days you hit a meeting every day, but I've tried to keep doing that. So that takes up some time, and I've got some service commitments. I go to the detox, and we take a meeting into a place in Lakeview. So,
well, that's awesome.
Just keep myself busy with recovery-related things.
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. And tell everybody how many days sober are we talking about now?
God willing, I will have 5 months tomorrow.
See, and that's
something
awesome. God is so good. I mean, that's just wonderful to hear. What else advice for somebody? You know, I was in the I do a service commitment to the detox, and I was with some this week, and they're hungry for information. What if you were going to tell them one or two things coming out of detox? The most important thing, besides obviously the meetings and everything else, how have you been able to put 5 months together?
Get phone numbers and use them. Just if you're thinking it's kind of funny, or talk to somebody about it. Don't hold it in, because there's people that'll listen and there's people that'll give advice and help. You just gotta let them.
Yeah,
you can't try to do it by yourself.
Yeah, you got to lean on your people. Lewis, any?
Yeah, I just want to, Kayla, you mentioned service work. Can you give us some ideas as to what you're referring to?
Yeah, I I chair meetings on a regular basis, which means I get there early. I set up the meeting. I make the coffee. I close the meeting at the end. I am the secretary for my home group. And like I said, I go to the detox and take the meeting to Lakeview, and just kind of keeps you out of yourself, you know.
Well,
I was going to ask you, to the novice or the person who's not one of us, what is the significance of that?
It gives you a purpose, you know, something to look forward to, something to make you feel like you have, you know what I mean, like you're important.
When you mentioned it also gets you out of your head.
Yes, very much so. When you can help somebody else, you know.
well, that is so important. And tell us, Kayla, what are your plans for the future? I mean, what what are you going to do with your life now that you're sober?
I definitely want to go back to school, for sure.
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, listen,
Yeah.
we appreciate you checking in with us. We'll talk to you again next week. We hope you have a great week. And like I say, it helps for us to actually introduce our listeners and our viewers to somebody that's actually doing the deal instead of talking about it. So we appreciate
Yeah.
your candor and your honesty. And we'll talk to you next week.
All right, thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much. So, Lewis, that's good. We got Kayla. Sounds like that
Yes.
she's on a good path for us. So that's cool. And so,
But there's one thing I wanted to bring up about that, and it just dawned on me that as we all know, that sobriety is really an action program, and she's really got it.
yeah,
She's got the action part of this thing down pat, I think. Now, as we know, you have to keep that up, but I like she's got a plan.
yeah.
You know, I mean, there's some systemic issues going on there with her that I think she can carry forward with.
Well, we'll talk with, and I'll go ahead and introduce Bonnie. Bonnie Corcoran is our in studio guest tonight. Bonnie's a wonderful lady. She has. I'll just read what she sent to me, which is perfect. She's in her 46th year of recovery. She left the business world after 6 years in recovery and worked in mental health as a substance abuse counselor. Subsequently, she worked as a family counselor at Camp Lejeune Naval Hospital, followed by serving as counselor at Durham County General Hospital, which resulted in her move to Pinehurst Treatment Center as Director of Counseling and Program Director. In 1991, she began private practice in Pinehurst and remained there until her retirement 8 years ago. She's also taught workshops and conferences, as well as conducted many spiritual retreats in churches, as well as directing recovery retreats in North and South Carolina and Virginia. And when I say lead recovery, I mean Bonnie is one of those people that is up to her neck in recovery, not just her own, but in everybody that she touches. And she actually she married Taylor and I, so I never did completely thank you for that, Bonnie, but I probably still owe you some money, but I appreciate you. But Bonnie, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, I think when you said I'm up to my neck in recovery, I think for new people that would be scary, and also Lewis's comment about it's an action program. Most people want to get off the sauce and rest. They're kind of tired after all of that. And I think Kayla's point about it getting you out of yourself simply means that she is not thinking obsessively about whatever drug of choice she had, that she gives herself something to do right now, getting very involved. So she's busy a lot, and she doesn't have time for the mental obsession of alcohol and drugs. Then as we progress, I noticed you said, well, what would you like to do with the rest of your life? Poor girl.
Really?
It was
Yeah.
unfair, but I always like to
Yeah.
hit them.
Kayla,
You like to hit them when you can.
You didn't ask me that question. You notice that?
That's right. Or me, thank God. Okay. But at any rate, she said, I would like to go back to school, which means I want more education. I want to learn some more things so that I can get more involved in life. And I think when we talk about up to our neck in recovery, what it means is I get to live a full life. I get to be involved in helping some other people learn how to live a full life.
Yeah.
And then I get to live a full life. So that doesn't mean I'm always in a treatment center helping somebody get sober. It means I'm out having a good time. My thing is, and I tell everybody this after all these years, since I couldn't drink anymore, I decided that the thing that I really was going to do was learn a new way to get high. All right, and I'm very determined at. Yeah,
I like that.
All right, I mean, surely to God, okay, I could learn some way to get high besides just drinking. Due to the fact that after the drug wore off, I wasn't getting high anymore. It started out great, and it didn't do so well. So my thing was, how could I find ways to be interested in my life and be full of joy and full of happiness? And I'm also a comfort pig, so how could I do fun, comforting things and to take good care of myself? That's what I was interested in. And so when you say, right now, of course, I'm rather old now, so I should be.
You are not.
I'm not doing as much
is so
fun
not true.
things as I used to, but I'm having fun, okay?
You're at least 46.
That's right, and 78 would be closer. So I told them, they didn't let me put on any makeup. I told them if they're going to show this online, I need at least a pound of pancake makeup so I'd look at least a year younger.
Well,
But
our
they
buddy
don't care about that. They're men.
Terry will post-produce the makeup. Don't worry about it. He can take care of that.
I just realized, I just did the math. You got sober in 74.
That's correct.
I had just graduated from high school.
I know. I knew that.
Well, I didn't mean it that way, but I mean, I
hope you'll
hadn't
listen
even
and learn.
started well at that point. I mean, you did
I was
make it
waiting
through.
for you.
You did make it through the 60s, though.
I made it through the 60s.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun.
I'm
until
sure it was.
wasn't.
What little you remember of it, right?
That's right. It was fun until it wasn't. I only stop things when it's no longer helpful. And it was really not helpful when I got around to stopping drinking.
1974. Wow, Bonnie, I hadn't even
That's
thought
right.
about that.
That's right.
That was an interesting time. I was still a junior in high school.
That's right. We had names on seats in AA or whatever recovery situation you were
Really?
in. Yeah, we had your names written on there.
Isn't that cool? Well, that's one of the things I really want tonight while we're talking to you. We've had so many. We've had Dr. Jason Jerry's been on, and so we've talked a lot about the current state of treatment. But I really wanted to talk about from a perspective of where it came from. And, it's funny. I mean, people started officially, through the 12-step fellowships in the mid-30s started trying to get sober.
That's right.
And so it's funny. We're all still trying to – the goal is the same. I think the techniques or certainly the language or the process has changed some, but the goal remains the same. And I was just wondering, from your perspective, if things gotten better, things gotten worse. I mean, give us an idea. You've seen an awful lot from the time that you started in this business to where we are now, and I'd just love to get your view on that.
Well, I will tell you that things have gotten significantly worse because we no longer have the funds available to help people who desperately need help. We're going backward. When I went to work for Dr. Clark many years ago, he said, and he's passed on, but he said when he came into working as an intern, as a psychiatrist, people were held behind bars who had mental illness or had issues. Today we're doing the same thing. And what I know when I worked in mental health was we had the money to go to some of the best workshops available. We had the ability to do lots of groups for people. We just did a lot of programs, family programs. That was really in the 70s was kind of the height, the 70s and 80s was the height of really reaching out to people. And so many people got well during that time. Now it's difficult for people. The good thing is there are still there's recovery programs available for people in all walks of life. Recovery from addiction to drugs and alcohol, recovery from sexual issues, recovery from gambling, whatever. In fact, I have a cat that I think might need Alicat. Yeah, because she got hold of some catnip the other day, and she's usually a pretty vocal cat. And so this time, she just stopped talking.
Somebody will have a
and the only thing whatever
treatment
you
for
said
that.
to her was,
Yeah,
the colors, that's all she
yeah,
said.
I'm sure it will not be cheap either. That that is the thing. The business of treatment is, I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry now. You put the publicity and now the politicians have gotten involved. The drug companies are being held accountable. So now all of a sudden there's this whole new ocean of money. And, nobody's really figured out where the money's going to go. We know where it's coming from, but where's it going to end up? And will it ever sprinkle down to the person who really can't afford treatment but needs it so bad?
That's right.
That's the thing that we want to try and identify. One of the things that we would like to be able to do through the show is to maybe help develop some programs, or at least identify some programs that are for people who don't have insurance, and who, homeless people who are hungry. Listen, and Lewis and I, when we first started the show, we described our own little journeys to where we currently are today. But I know what it's like to be hungry, and you would think, with the kind of life I had, I would have never worried about eating, but I did. And that's where alcohol and drugs, that's where it can take you.
Well, think about this. I may be wrong, but I have been known to be wrong. But
Not on this show.
not on this show, not yet. But if you think about it, there are probably many, many more options for getting clean and sober now than there have ever been. I mean, think about all the properties that are out there, even nonprofit and profit, and yet the problem is continuing to spiral.
Yeah.
So I don't even attempt to know the solution to this, but it just blows my mind that we've got this problem at this juncture in history.
Well, I think that, and Bonnie, I'd love for you to weigh in on this. I think that it's a positive. Things have certainly gotten worse in terms of the level of drug, the availability of drugs are significantly higher than they were when I was growing up. But it's also become something that we now talk about. And for a long time, I remember I didn't know my grandfather was an alcoholic until after I've been through recovery and I've done some research. But I remember my mom, always saying that my grandfather had to go away because he was not doing well. It wasn't that they were sending him somewhere to dry out, which is what was going on. But it just you didn't say that. These days, I don't think that people are as embarrassed or feel as uncomfortable saying that I'm a alcoholic and I'm a drug addict. I mean, for those of us that are, there's a certain amount of freedom and relief that comes with telling people that, because that's the one thing that we don't have to hide from anymore.
Well, I think people aren't reluctant to say that after they get well, but they're certainly reluctant to say it beforehand, because that means you have to sign up and do something about your drug or alcohol or whatever your addiction might be. You might have to stop that. So, of course, they don't want to talk about it initially. I do think that, and I will say, Lewis, because I was very cognizant of all the places that were available in the state of North Carolina, we have lost many of our recovery centers in the 90s. We lost a lot of recovery centers. So that was hard. And right now my son works in a hospital where we're trying to get people into treatment. And again, this situation, if you don't have any money, it's almost impossible. We had state programs. We had a lot of those available around the state, and they were good. I mean, I went to a lot of them to meet people and so forth, and they were well done. So I miss that. I think we do have more people in recovery because, as you said, we're now more aware of we have more education out there about what to look for and, what you can do. And so we have a lot of people in recovery programs that reach out one-on-one to people. And we do have a lot of small like halfway houses, some places where people can come and at least heal a little bit and go back out into the community. But it's really down to people like Kayla reaching out one-on-one to somebody else is really going to help people. We do need, though, places where you can go and get enough healing where you can come off, get detoxed enough, a long enough time, so that your brain is detoxed, i.e., at least 28 days, preferably longer. We could sure use some of that.
Well, I will tell you, we had, and Bonnie, we had the sheriff of Lee County on here, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 weeks ago, and he told us, and we talked about it, as you mentioned, the county jail has become the homeless shelter for so many of the small counties that don't have the resources. The hospitals are trying to make a living, and so they're not there to open the doors to take all the comers. And these poor jails are filled up. I think one of the things, and we've said this, I've said this a bunch on the show and when I talk to other people, I mean, in 100 years, when they look back on our society, probably one of the worst grades we'll get as a society is how we treated our mentally ill.
I agree.
They're marginalized. We just assume they go away.
Right.
And it's just it's heartbreaking. But as you said, nobody really has come up with any kind of solution, other than some of the 12-step fellowships are out there and their doors are always open. They're always going to welcome somebody. But yeah, it's hard. And one of the things that from the time that I go in, do some of the service work that I do, the people are across the board, different ages. I mean, it's not just the kids that are having the problems. I mean, you'll still run into 40, 50, 60-year-olds that are still, prisoners of their addiction. And everybody needs help. Help's got to come from somewhere. Listen, the politicians pick up on it. For a while, it becomes cool to talk about it. This opioid crisis gave everybody a platform to get up and say, I'm for this, I'm for that. Health care. But at the end of the day, if you don't have insurance, if you don't have money, it's hard to get sober.
Well, one of the things you were talking about, that there are more drugs are more easily available, I disagree with that, too. My mother used to talk about, she was born in 1900, so we're going really way back here. And about in the 1920s, one of the favorites songs at the time were about cocaine. Okay. So what I've lived long enough to see is just this round robin of we go from cocaine to THC, and marijuana, to PCP and marijuana, and send people, into Never Land forever, into, as we now are back in heroin. But it just keeps circulating. It's really not the amount of drugs or the availability. It's really about where people are at in their lives and what most people live in a drinking era and a drug era, and so most people are going to offer you a drug or an alcohol, drink or whatever somewhere along the line, and your decision has to be, to take a look at how you're using and how viable that is for you within your life. The other part of that, and we said we were going to talk a little bit about this, is if you're not going to do that, what is your hope for a better life? What is the hope that you can have a better life? Basically, when I first got sober, I was only 32, and my thought was, well, my life is over.
Right.
No more dancing, no more singing, no more running up and down the roads, no more fun. Okay?
No more, as the book says, whoopee parties.
Yeah. No more excitement.
Yep.
All right. And when you come to believe that, you're hard pressed to want to stop using whatever you're using that alters your brain. One of the things that I love about Dr. Daniel Amen is he points out about the brain, if you can let it become cognitive, that this is the engine that runs the whole ship. And the only way you get to be in charge of your whole life is if you get a clear brain. I talk to people about the fact that you probably couldn't wait to get out of your home where everybody was telling you what to do. And finally you find the front door and you leave and you're about 20 and maybe you quickly get married or get into school or whatever, but then other people are still telling you what to do. At some point, if alcohol or drugs take over, they tell you what to do, and you never become free. You never get to make a choice about how you want to live your life. Just as now Kayla's saying, well, I'd like to go back to school. Now she also gets to choose what she's going to take in school, and who she's going to associate with, and how it's going to be, and whether she wants to have a lot of fun. I've done a lot of fun things because I believed in having fun. Remember, getting high.
Sure.
So learned how to sail plane, and just did all kinds of things. And I have great stories about all those things, the fun stuff and the good times. And that's the things that I try to share with people, that I'm still doing fun things that suit me. The thing of it is, you get to know yourself when you're actually sober. And you're like, wow, so what do you like now? Not what you liked when you were 10. What do you like today? What do you like at, 32? What do you like at 42? We evolve, and our interests change, and our, desires. The other part of that is making, knowing that you have some meaning and purpose in your life. So there is a meaning and purpose in trying to help other people, but there's also a meaning and purpose in, evolving your own life, learning some things, and becoming somebody that you are suited with, to feel comfortable within your own skin. I really decided on recovery for two reasons. I had a son who was 10 years old, and I didn't want him to have that kind of lifestyle. But the second thing was, they kept talking in recovery programs about serenity, and I'd never had any, ever. So I kept thinking to myself, I want that. So I would go to these recovery meetings and say, well, how do you people,
Right.
how do you people do this serenity?
Of course, you weren't part of that, right?
No, of course
So-
not. It was
exactly.
I was observing them, of course.
We're
those
experimenting.
people. That's right. How do you people have this? And they would say things like, oh, just keep coming back, which I found nauseating. But the point of the matter is, I kept coming back, and it crept in where I actually had serenity. I actually had joy, which is an inside job where this is going to work out. It's going to be okay.
I would love to, and Louis, I will defer to you in just 1 second. One of the things that Bonnie and I talked about this week when we were talking about the show was spirituality, and what part that plays in recovery. And I do want, over the second half of the show, to talk about spirituality and psychotherapy and all the different fancy names that we have. But at the end of the day, it's a conversation about what you believe and what you don't believe, I think, or at least it does for a lot of people. But
Oh, yeah.
go ahead, Louis. What were you going to say?
Well, no, you brought up a subject that I hear as a result of running a treatment center, that people come in and they look miserable because, as to your point, they don't think they're going to have any more fun.
Right.
And you would think, now AA was founded in 1935. You got sober in 74. It is now 2020, and you're hearing the same things that have been repeated. You would think at least that part of it would get solved, that you can have fun.
Right.
Is it we're not taking the message to people the correct way? Are we not illustrating it? And one other thing, too, I just realized there have been in the last, at least I started hearing about them about 6 months ago, there's a movement in some larger towns to have sober bars.
Oh yeah, it's
Have you
a
guys heard
huge
of that?
business. Yeah, huge.
Can you
business.
imagine? I mean, the fact they're calling them sober bars.
What's happened? Because over the last 2 years, I've seen a bunch of that and researched it because I'm always interested in stuff like that. When you start having certain popular, or they call them influencers, when those people start getting sober, when the Brad Pitts of the world start getting sober and talk about it, it becomes cool. And once you have established that it could be hip or cool to be sober, well, now all of a sudden you're seeing these guys, and listen, entrepreneurs are always looking for different ways to make money. They're making the same money off the drinks that they were making when they were putting liquor in them, just not putting any liquor in them. What they're doing is they're still putting the fancy little umbrellas in there, and they're putting in 2 or 3 different kinds of fruit juices and coming up with cool names, and they're appearing responsible, but you're still going to go and spend $6.50 for a glass of pineapple juice. The margins on that are pretty daggone nice, and so. But you're right. I mean, and not only that, but also from a business perspective, you don't have the liability insurance because you're not serving people liquor anymore. And so you're right. I think that sobriety there's opportunity for it to become more mainstream. But we're probably still 20, 30, maybe 100 years away from it becoming something that people don't feel like they're going to be missing out on something.
Well, I guess in general, how many people have to die? Who has to die? What is the catalyst going to be? And I brought this up on the show earlier, another show, but to me, one of the defining moments in addiction was when Betty Ford came out of the closet.
Mm-hmm.
She actually gave addiction a face. Who is going to have to come forward to take us to that next level, or what's going to have to come forward that we haven't thought of yet? Because I know you've seen an incredible amount of change in the 46 years. If I could remember that far, if I had not been doing what I was doing, I probably would have a memory of some of those things. But all I see is the disease progressing and morphing, I guess.
I don't think it is.
Okay.
I think always and ever, from long before we formed the United States, primitive times, they said about 1/10 of us will find something to be addicted to and be addicted. And we used to say back it was like 1 out of every 10 persons was an alcoholic. Now we say it's probably a little, higher. Part of that is we are a more well-to-do country, and we have better access to a lot of, the bar thing. I had to laugh when y'all were talking about the sober bars, because when I first got sober, that just seemed like a wonderful idea to me. And I had in our back room, a really nice back room, and I thought, I'm going to just invite all the gang up there. I'm going to set up a bar. It's going to be a bar atmosphere, kind of low lights.
Yeah.
And that kind of music that you play, kind of, she left me, and I'm drinking in my bar. Okay. So that kind of music, and then we were going to, this was my whole idea, and I would be doing all those fancy drinks, and people would be so relieved to get out of a meeting and come to my bar. And I shared that with my husband, who was also in recovery, and he said, and then a little while later, I had enough sobriety under my belt to know that just wasn't anything I really needed. I do think we're lucky to have coffee shops. That's kind of neat, places to meet people where there isn't alcohol served. So it would be nicer to have like pool halls. I know we had one in Southern Pines for a while that was alcohol free. And that kind of thing would be nice to have more places.
Well, if you go into the bigger cities, you'll find them, and they actually market to that crowd. And we always talk about the 12-step fellowships. There's other recovery movements, Celebrate Recovery. There's a lot of people out there that are banging the drum that, hey, look, you know what? You can live a clean life. You can live a sober life, and it's fun. It's fun. And guess what? You don't spend as much money on attorneys or doctors because you're not always in trouble, and you're not always killing yourself with drugs. And so, but, that message, I mean, let's face it, the movies, I mean, all the different ways that we as a society glorify alcohol. And, I mean, think about the amount of money that's spent advertising a substance that we know kills people. And as a society, there we are, the biggest sporting events are sponsored by the beverages that we know kill people, and everybody seems to be okay with that. So that's a kind of if you really want to peel the onion back, that's really what we're talking about.
Well, to Bonnie's point though, at 10%, that means 90% of the population can actually handle what they're drinking.
Right. How fair is that?
Right. Exactly. Well, that too, but why? That's a good point. You got me on that one. But why should you have to limit a product that 90% of the population can actually deal with? I'm getting ready to, it's interesting, I'm getting ready to go tomorrow morning to Colorado, where, as we all know, marijuana is legalized. I'm just worried about the secondhand smoke I'm going to get before I get back here. But, you know, the government there has said it's okay to consume it. And, you know, who am I to say it's not okay if you're part of that 90%?
That's right.
I'm all about freedom.
Sure.
My problem was mine.
Well, that was one of the things you said, what is it going to take? And I think that's really an individual question. Each person, you know, when we were working with DUI, this was back in the days before there were Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, and so we would have people coming into our groups who had 11 DUIs, no kidding. And they would say, you know, the people in this town, the cops in this town are just out to get me. And I'd say, well, if you know that and you keep getting in your car,
Yeah.
when you're drunk, you're either really, really stupid or you might have an addiction problem, okay?
Or a combination of
Yeah,
it.
or combination of both. Well, I didn't say that. I gave him an out. But I've lost my train of thought because I'm old. You know, basically, when we are looking at my decision to come off the sauce and get better, it's just individual with me. I have to make that decision. Oh, I know. And what we would say to these people is, okay, so you drove again drunk. All right. So what would stop you from actually doing this anymore? What would it take for you to put the stuff down? How about if you run over somebody? What do you think about? Oh, of course I would never, I would never get that far. Okay, so if you want to back it off from running over somebody, okay, what would it be? All right?
Mm-hmm.
And they would give you something like, if I ever get arrested again, okay, now remember, we've got people at 11 DUIs. If I ever get arrested, we've been arrested many times. That's really good. Yes, I've made a decision if I ever get arrested again. I said, okay, we'll be really happy to see you again if you ever get arrested. Then you'll put it down. So we would ask all these things, and we would ask people to write that down and put it in their dresser drawer or on their mirror. And then when that happened, they were then, am I going to do something about this? And I guess I think about, I'm too close.
No.
Oh,
Just
okay.
a little bit louder.
Okay, well, yeah. So I think about, if you write that down, if you are listening and you're thinking to yourself, well, what would it take for me to decide not to drink or drug? What would it take for me? Write it down and ask yourself, what is it that I want out of my life? Really?
Well, Bonnie, to your point, too many of us, when we're in that condition or in active addiction, are moving the line that we're going to cross.
Right.
We just keep moving. You were just
Move it
sharing.
up.
We keep moving it. Okay, I won't do this. And I do it. Then, I won't do this.
That's right.
And I keep moving it until there is no line. It's imaginary. It's in our heads, which, as we all know, is part of the problem.
Right. But if you become a little bit aware that you keep moving the line, it might make you a little nervous.
It might, yes.
Just a little bit.
It's funny, I was talking with a couple of people last night, and I was explaining my day when I was in active addiction, drinking and opiate addiction, and I explained to them what I had to go through just to get back to where I had stopped.
Right.
And it was, it's so much work, and we all looked at each other, and we all, I've got 7 years sobriety now, but we all thought, that just doesn't seem to be worth it. You know, and at some point, if you're lucky, at some point that awareness or that realization comes that this just does not make sense. There's a lot of people who never get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, one of the things, we ask what needs to happen. I think really on a much smaller level, what we have to do, those of us in recovery, we have to demonstrate to those people that are thinking about recovery or in early recovery, we have to demonstrate through the way we live, not what we say, but what we do.
Exactly.
And that's what's so important, is that we set an example, and that we still, we still do the things that we used to do drunk or high, and we can still enjoy them. As a matter of fact, I would argue that we could be better at them. But you have to actually get out, and you have to do it. And it was funny because last night the realization hit all of us that, well, it just doesn't seem to make any sense. Bonnie, one of the things that we haven't had a chance to touch on, and the hour always goes by too fast for us, but spirituality. Explain to us a little bit how spirituality lends itself to your recovery.
Okay, I can tell you how it lives itself in my recovery. We say the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. So if you are disconnected, all right, you're in sad shape. There is no hope. There's no life. Connection is spiritual. A lot of people get very caught up in the word God. Is it PC to talk about God, or, is it intellectual to have any kind of relationship with God? So people get very caught up in that, and they, as a result, don't go to 12-step recovery programs because God gets mentioned a couple of times in there, and that makes them nervous. I say, take that word out and use another word. What would love do in this situation? Ask yourself for, how can I be more loving to myself, to other people, and that's really, and to the world, and that is really what it's about. So the spirituality to me is on the inside. Since I now have a brain, I can say to myself, how did you handle your day today? Was it good for you? I know one of the fellows the other day was saying that he had a slip. He'd been sober 5 years, and he went back out. And he said it was because I got so involved in service work that I didn't have any time for myself.
Right.
All right? I just had no time to have any fun. And I told him about a book by a guy named Gale Sayers. I guess you all know because you're sports
He's
people.
a pretty good football player.
Okay, that's what I've heard. And I don't know anything about all that, but I'm sure other people do. Anyhow, he wrote a book called I Am Third. And what he said, because he was a Christian, was that when he was trying to be a loving person, having created a relationship with Jesus, he said what he wanted to do was do some stuff for Jesus, and then do some stuff for other people, and then do something for himself. So he, would go do something nice for Jesus that he thought was nice, bake a cake for the church or whatever, I don't know, raise some money, and then he would go and help some other people who asked for his help, or provide his truck or whatever, take people somewhere. And then he would think, okay, now me, and no, wait, Jesus stepped in again, and then somebody else signed up. Pretty soon he's 13th in line, and he hates this whole thing. He doesn't think it's fun at all. So he decided that before he gave up on his version of spirituality, that he would, well, maybe it was his higher power said to him, listen, you're third. Joy is Jesus first, others second, yourself third. So I would say, when you think about love, wherever your spiritual belief or religious belief is, it really doesn't matter. I need to love, the world, let's say. I need to love sobriety. So to me, that is helping other people in AA, because I watch people dying. I know how many people die of this constantly. This is a serious thing. And then I need to help some friends or other people specifically, and be with them. And then I need to do something nice for Bonnie. It's quite easy to say, I have an appointment today, I can't meet with you, my appointment is with me. To go and do something fun, and I do a lot of fun things. So that's my thing. I can only give, spiritually speaking, of my when I am full measure, full cup, pouring out,
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
I do.
Didn't say that very well, but full cup, and it's pouring over, and I give of my excess. I cannot give of my essence. If I give of my essence, I become Mary or Marvin Martyr. So I have nothing to give, and I'm angry about it. And we know that in recovery, you cannot afford to go around having resentments and anger. It is heavy on you. We don't do well with heavy. We have to be light. Okay, so how to lighten ourselves is we get, because we're human, angry, we get hungry, we get lonely, we get tired. The thing that they say about HALT in recovery is don't get too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, which means before you go to that spot, do something about it, all right? Feed yourself, get with some other people, and go talk about your anger and, figure out a solution for it. Which is what I would say recovery is about. It's solution-oriented. So that's the spirituality. The spirituality is loving ourselves enough to feel full enough to love one another.
Louis, when you got you guys over there and at Wellwyn and you're doing group, these conversations, is there a spirituality part of what you guys do? I've always been interested. I mean, you certainly hear the conversations, but when I was in formal treatment, there wasn't a lot of that conversation going on. You know, I got most of it when I got out and you know, started practicing recovery on my own.
So I like the way you worded that. That's very disarming, particularly to people who have problems with spirituality,
Right.
or they attached God to it.
Right.
But, to answer your question, Megan, because we're an outpatient program, and because you're only with us 9 hours of group a week, we do not, and we do it intentionally, take you through the 12 steps.
Right.
And and it's purposeful because we expect you to do that out in the community. We don't tell you not to do it, but what we have found, to Bonnie's point, is there's a term that I learned from a gentleman that didn't have quite as many years as Bonnie, but has a lot more than I do, who does this for a living. He coins the term or used a term called Therapeutic Alliance. And his definition of that is the feeling that the bond between the group and the individual. And you use the word connection, that the group and the individuals in the group kind of take over. A good group just has a facilitator. There's nobody really teaching them. They can kind of take that and turn it into, for lack of a better word, a higher power. And I have seen that firsthand for people who have come in the front door and you would say they are hopeless, this will never work, they're spinning their wheels, and they'll come out on the other end and they get the most out of it. But it's, to me, and they may never attend an AA meeting, but that's their power. And they miss it when they're not there. They're the ones who arrive early. You know, they're the ones who are getting other people coffee or a drink or whatever. We serve M&Ms at our place. It's
Yeah,
great. That's my favorite food.
Yeah, I've stolen more than my share
Yes,
when
you
I
have.
visit.
So, but you see the Therapeutic Alliance come together, and it also happens between a good therapist and an individual, but you really see it in group, where the group takes on that higher power spirituality part of the recovery process. I mean, grown men will just break down and cry in front of people they would never do that in front of outside in the real world.
Yeah, you know, I think one of the things that struck me even last night is what most people, and it's funny, my friend Paul, who I walk with every morning, he's in with us today, and we were having this conversation this morning, but what people really want is a conversation. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to have things discussed with them. And you've got to make it okay for them to be honest with you. And so there's a lot of different, motivational interviewing, a lot of different techniques that we always talk about. But what people really want is they want to feel comfortable that they can tell you what they need to tell you in a judgment-free zone so they can really participate in their own recovery as opposed to having it shoved down their throats, or at least, as you can't speak down to anybody if you're trying to help them, And it was really cool last night because we were just kind of sitting around talking. It wasn't, a lot of times when you go in and you tell your story, people are listening, but the interaction is so important on the recovery side. And you're right, group is a great way. When I was in treatment, I loved my group. I developed relationships with all the other guys. I learned about there, and it made me feel more normal to be around people that weren't normal, and so I think those are some of the things that can come from, participating in those kinds of recovery techniques. But, the spirituality is something the God thing is something that makes people uncomfortable sometimes.
Well, I'm one of those guys, and I see this all the time. People come into the program, and they pretty much think they are God. They really do. They think their lives are running along fine, regardless of what their family members are saying. And that was me. I couldn't believe in God because I was God.
Yeah.
And, gee, my life was just running along great. So you've got to, I think you kind of touched on it, you have to break that person down to a point where they're willing to accept the fact that they aren't, and there is something bigger, and I use the term better than they are, that can help them over this process once they realize that they cannot do it on their own.
Yeah.
That their best thinking got them there.
I remember a fellow that they told me that they were carrying him out in an ambulance from very severe, almost deathly attack of cirrhosis. And on the way out, as they were carrying him on the stretcher, he noticed that his dog had gone over to the water bowl and was drinking some water. And he thought, for heaven's sakes, the dog's doing great, and I'm being carried on a stretcher. If I make it through this, he said, I'm never going to drink anything more than the dog drinks. And he said he never did. He never drank anything.
So the dog was
his
his higher power.
Dog was his higher power, which is why I wanted to
Okay.
point out that the big deal is identification. And that is why group works and why recovery groups work. You go in and, like myself, Paul and I were talking about both of us, believe it or not, being introverts. And so when I went into recovery programs, I sat there closed off like this, and I wasn't going to tell anybody anything about myself. That was my business. And so I didn't. I didn't have to. They talked about themselves, and I waited for them to be judgmental of one another, but they weren't. Now I was judgmental of all them. But sometimes what leaked through was, I went, oh my gosh, I think that. I feel that. I'm like that. And then I began to, occasionally go, oh yeah, me too. That's where you get connection. So that forms trust. And we had this Catholic priest that worked at the treatment center, Pinehurst Treatment Center. I kind of replaced him, although I'm not a priest, obviously. But anyhow, Father Bob, and he was one of us. But he used to give a little lecture on faith, all right? And he said, faith is the last thing that happens in the process. The first part of it is absolute desperation, in spite of doubt. So he likened it to being in a high building, and you're on the building's on fire, and there's, fellows out there catching people with their things, and they're saying, jump, we'll catch you, because the only way out is through the window. And, questions, you jump, and hope to heck they can catch you. But if they said to you, well, we're just practicing catching people, so would you mind jumping? You'd be like, oh, we don't think so. So the first part of it is desperation. And the second thing of it is authority, i.e., somebody beside you has been there and done that, and they know more than you know. Okay? An example is, if the earth is, we say it's round, but how do you know that? That's just some people saying that. Have you been to the ends? Have you ever noticed lots of people say they're going to get in touch with you, and they move and never hear from them? They've moved off the end of the earth. The earth is flat, and there's a certain way. Just that's it for you.
I've heard that.
Right. Well, that's what happens. So how do you know that? How do you know polar bears really live on the North Pole, et cetera? That they're not just dying grizzly bears white and saying this is the North Pole. Other people have been there, enough people have been there and done it that they say this is really true, that you come to believe it, okay?
But Bonnie, alcoholics are unique. They know it. You can't tell them anything.
So then you say to them, you try it because you've got authority. So try this, and people will try something. If they have a negative response to that, okay, they will have, they have now their own experience, correct?
Mm-hmm.
If they have a positive experience, to that, then they'll have a positive experience. So now you have what? Your own experience. And you know what you got faith in? Your own experience. So the only way to help people is to put people in the situations where they have some a chance, such as recovery programs that you're talking about, to breathe in and breathe out and be in a situation where groups are happening, or people through desperation will come into a recovery group, on their own and sit and listen and try some of these things. And if it works, they'll have faith in it. The
Yeah.
other faith is trust, that if you keep doing it, the interesting thing is stuff happens and you're like, oh, that worked out a lot better than I thought. And, you get 2 years of trust and you get 5 years of trust.
Yeah.
And you get a little more relaxed.
I will tell you what you guys are discussing is so personal for me. When the last few years I drank, I had isolated so much, and you can think your way into a prison. Alcohol is certainly the jailer, but you can think your way into prison. And I remember not dying in the hospital and being in the first treatment center, thinking, how in the world did I end up here and what's going to happen to me? And they handed me that book, and I read about this guy, Bill Wilson, and I got to tell you, I saw myself in him. If you've ever read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, he describes, Bill's story is one of those interesting chapters for me, but he describes golf, and I was a golfer, so it was really personal for me. But I actually started to think that maybe I could have a life that didn't include drinking, because it had been my entire life. And so what you're talking about is so true. But everybody has got to go through some personal process. I mean, it does require, there's no one size fits all. But it is interesting, the spirituality part of it. And it is, for me, I think that when we show other people that our life is, maybe it's different, but it's, I enjoy it. I love my life now.
Me too.
I do. Lewis and I have had that conversation. Anybody, if I could describe my life drinking and using, it would certainly sound fantastic. Fantastic, but it almost killed me. The fact of the matter is that how I lived almost killed me, and it certainly ruined a lot of people's lives. So it's just interesting. It's always interesting when we start these conversations. They could go on forever. But we're down. We only got a couple minutes left.
I do
Lewis?
have one comment. I was just doing the math while I think Bonnie was talking. I'll be 97 when I get 46 years in it. So I'm going to invite you guys to the party.
Yeah.
Okay?
Coming.
We'll be
Everybody's
here.
invited.
I'll be there.
Good.
Yeah. And Bonnie, your wisdom, thanks so much.
Thank you for
We'll
having me. I
certainly have you
appreciate
back on. The
asking.
one conversation and maybe we'll bring Paul in on the conversation, is flow. I love talking about flow, but these are all things that we can start to have conversations about in recovery. So many of our people, we're still trying to get them to start to consider recovery. We got so many people that we all know and we all work with that are still fighting the disease. They're still out there fighting the battle. But Lewis, next week, I'm not sure who we're going to have. You and I will discuss that. But I look forward to the show next week. Any parting thoughts?
Gee, put me on the spot. I can't think of it. Well, are we? Is it back to the old time? 8 o'clock?
After I talk with the owner, I'll let you know. But
Okay.
yeah, I think next week it will be. And if you go to our website, our this week's show will be posted by then, and we'll have the time for next week's show. You have a good trip to Colorado. Bonnie, you have a great week. Taylor, thanks for riding with me over here as always, honey. You're the best. And Paul, it's great. Roy and Terry, the whole gang. So we appreciate you guys listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Good night.
Good night.
You've been listening to The Recovery Boys on WFJA. Visit the Recovery Boys website at therecoveryboys.com. We thank you for listening to The Recovery Boys.
WFJA 105.5, Sanford, Pinehurst, Southern Pines.